Hello and welcome to Unredacted, our new podcast from Reveal, a reboot of what we've done in the past, but a new format, a new platform, the same audience and expanded, and a wonderful set of guests. My guest today is David Fisk, and I will let David introduce himself, tell us a little bit about what he does, where he does it, and how he got to it. So David, let's get going.
Thanks, George. So, David Fisk here. I work for an organization called Salient Discovery, and we use the Reveal platform for the vast majority of our activities. We operate in two territories primarily, the UK and Northern Europe in general, and also in South Africa. In fact, our engine room sits in South Africa, so we're able to deliver some fairly competitive services. We've recently expanded into Namibia, which is another area where there's a large amount of fraud. So that's what we do. A lot of our work is related to primarily investigatory work, I'd say, George. So obviously Reveal sells to a whole range of people, including lawyers, investigators, and so on. The vast majority of our work is related to investigations, and they typically tend to be very large scale and right up to the top of government, at the state level, as well as obviously the small, more boutique type sort of investigations. But our speciality is investigations, is if the truth be known.
In my book, and maybe you got a different vantage point, whether someone's involved in an investigation of the type you're talking about, or whether they are involved in a lawsuit, they've got an arbitration perhaps, those are all at bottom investigations as well. So what you've got to talk about applies not just for the traditional investigations, I think, but for a broad range of attempts at figuring out how to find out what happened and to resolve disputes. Do you see it similarly?
I would 100% agree with you there, George. In fact, I would go even one stage further back and say that at the end of the day, eDiscovery is nothing if it's not search. We're searching for things, which is a great segue actually into my history. I came from a search-based organization, several search-based organizations ahead of this, and then got into the more application of search to the legal industry more recently, and then ultimately into eDiscovery. But it is at the end of the day search. You're looking for relevant, dare I use the pun, salient stuff within increasingly large corpuses of data, which is kind of why we were extremely pleased when we heard about Reveal's first Gen AI offering in Ask, in that the way that the Gen AI had been applied suited our purpose perfectly, which was sifting through very large corpuses of data to try and find that which was more relevant than less relevant. So it's been a pleasure actually being involved with the beta testing phases of the Ask product, and we're now into a phase with our clients where we are exposing it as far and wide as we can within that client base and to new clients, to kind of show them the art of the possible. And I say the art of the possible because I think, we talk about data science, but I think that the application of these technologies is actually an art form as well.
So first of all, thank you for participating in that early testing. Your feedback and your thoughts have been invaluable to our efforts to build and expand, improve, and enhance Ask. You've got by now a fair amount of experience using Ask. What I'd like you to start with is talk first about how you use it, and then let's go into some examples, because it always helps to hear real-world stories about how people use capabilities and derive benefits from them. But first of all, how is it that you use Ask? What do you do with it?
So, in essence, the approach is the same when we're speaking to our clients who are actually the sort of the end consumer of the tool. It's all about applying the basic principles of the retrieval augmented generation. So there's a little bit of an education process in terms of teaching people what the Gen AI tool is doing, and helping them to move away.
The education process, how do you explain to them what the tool does and demystify this for them?
We've kind of developed quite a pitch, actually, in terms of explaining the obviously not all of the details, and I'm not a data scientist myself, but I tend to try and break things down into terms that I understand, because I'm then able to communicate them to others. But sort of the primary issues about understanding what a context window is, the understanding of how to filter your results, to get a more rich set of data that's likely to yield better results, explaining what hallucination is, and having done that, we try and present the tool as just that. It's essentially a search tool as we position it, to help people to try and find that which is relevant. But it comes back to the whole point about Gen AI and AI in general not being a tool that's going to replace people, but a tool that is just that. It is a tool, and it is as good or as bad as the craftsperson who is wielding it. So some of the skill is in trying to teach and educate our users how to use the tool to best effect. And that's been part of the learning curve as we've gone through this, is trying to understand what works well, what works less well. And you get into all sorts of other conversations around the prompt engineering, and I don't get hugely into it, but it's very important to understand how you structure your question will have a marked impact on the results that you get. And some of it is frankly, it's a suck it and see, give it a go, see what is yielded. But the absolute critical thing at the end is to not take the results that Ask gives you as the verbatim response. They are nothing more than a very useful tool for accelerating your investigative journey. So don't expect it to replace your mindset of how you would normally explore or investigate any particular, whether it's a litigation, whether it's, as you say, a tribunal or a large-scale fraud investigation. Don't expect it to just magically give you the answer. Follow the same thought processes as you would do normally, but use it to explore different themes that you would explore when you're looking for, the malfeasance or whatever it might be. And then ultimately, you're still using your own human power of lateral thought to combine all that information that's, the tool will have accelerated your journey to finding that relevant information. I think that's the key to it. It's an acceleration tool. And having done that, then you're still going to build your legal argument as to why this case stands or falls. So I mean that's what I would say. So we go through that process of teaching people about what it is and what it isn't, and how you might apply it. And then we hand it over and say, right, well, go and start exploring. But as long as you've learned that you're not just going to ask it, well, who's guilty here, Governor? Because it's not going to tell you that answer with any kind of degree of satisfaction for anybody. But use it to explore those different areas in a more rapid way. So we've been doing that with lots of different cases, ranging from really quite small investigations, with literally sort of tens, if not hundreds of documents, through to some with, tens of millions of objects that need exploring. And I think part of I sound like I'm selling the tool for you. Part of the beauty of the way it is deployed is the way it is fully integrated into all the other elements of the existing Reveal product. So you can use all the kind of the filtering and combine it with conceptual clusters, combine it with conceptual search, communication charts to narrow down the information that when you're then actually going to ask a question of that resultant volume. And I think it's critical for people to realize that the more you make the information rich within the context window, the better your results are going to be. And there's a few little gotchas in there. So if you see your reference count number hit 100, then you kind of know, it's an indicator that you know that it's kind of topped out at that point, and you may well be missing something. So at that point, you need to become more granular in your querying and your sort of and your drilling into the data. But so we've been using it across a whole range of different cases, and some of them, when we initially started, obviously clients are skeptical, and so the first few cases where we were working with it was using it on cases where they'd already arrived at their endpoint, and really it was a question of seeing, would the tool find the same information, and would it find it any quicker? And the answer was always yes. So that's
yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's a very good result. I mean, I would caveat that with, has it found all the detail? And perhaps not.
No.
So the tool isn't necessarily going to find every single last bit of detail relating to a query, but it's going to tell you which stones to go and turn over to scratch under. And that is the crucial thing.
I think of it as a tool whose focus is on precision. It's all about precision. It's not at all about recall. If you need to find all of anything, tell me if you think otherwise, but I don't think this is the tool for you. If you're trying to get at highly valuable information and really good examples, then it makes sense. But tell me, from your experience, is that how it's working?
Absolutely. So, we've had a few cases where people have been trying to, for example, find transactions. So some of the corpus might be sort of bank transactions, and they've been saying, well, show me all the transactions between party A and party B, and it'll have a good stab at finding a good number of them, but it won't give you a definitive, exhaustive list, because it's not designed to do that. There are clearly some inbuilt limits to the engine. You ask it for, show me the top perpetrators or whatever, and it sort of self-implies its own definition of what top is. You might even ask it, show me top 10, and you might get 10. So little tricks like that, you need to sort of, as you say, it's about precision and not recall. But again, that's getting into more data science. And one thing I have found is that our users, the consumers of the product, are not data scientists. So you have to try and sort of explain what the tool does and doesn't do in layperson's terms, and that's I think part of the challenge, and it's very much a learning journey as we go forward. But some of the other ones.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so a lot of the cases are where we have large corpuses and we're trying to uncover specific themes. And as I say, it's worked best where people have applied their own thought processes to it and said, well, what are the sort of themes that we would explore? One particular case, looking for through some contracts to see whether there were some implied liabilities. And you can't just ask the question, what are the implied liabilities in this contract set? And it'll give you a stock answer. It'll be correct. But then what it didn't consider then was the fact that there was actually some other communications between individuals that hadn't been considered, that also overwrote what was in the standard contract. So the thought process needs to be, go and look at the different areas where you think there might be some contributory evidence, and then ask specific questions of that, and then construct the actual answer from those various results. So that's worked very well. We have used it on occasions in small document sets where we've been trying to summarize information across a relatively small document set. So one particular example, a client had was representing some insurers who were insuring their client against accusations of exposure to carcinogenic materials. And so they had lots and lots of information dating right back to the 50s. And they were trying to assimilate all these various reports and doctors' reports and previous court cases. And they wanted to understand to what extent any particular individual, how that case had progressed over sometimes decades. What diagnoses had been arrived at, and had that person ultimately been successful in their claim, and so on and so forth. And And all that was in a relatively small number of documents, possibly sort of 3,000 or so. And we were able to construct some queries. In fact, we ended up with a single prompt, able to answer all of the particular data points that we wanted by putting in an individual and understanding what they'd been diagnosed with, when their employment had started and ended with this organisation, and what their prognosis was, an outcome, and ultimately whether or not there'd been a payout to support this outcome. That was, again, very successful. So sometimes it seems to depend on the data set and how it's structured. I'm not saying that would always work, but the way the data was laid out in this particular document set seems to lend itself very well to that exercise, and something that would otherwise have taken, hours per case to try and sift through 3,000 documents to pick out the relevant information. So a very useful use case.
So if I'm hearing correctly, part of what you think can make for successful use of Ask is to make sure that even before you begin posing questions to it or using it to search data, get not just a better understanding of what you're trying to investigate, but also the corpus of data that you're working with, so you can figure out, do we go narrow and deep? Do we go wide and shallow? What do we want to accomplish with this?
Indeed, I think that's it. I mean, establish what your strategy is, like any good sort of case manager would do, before you actually delve in. You jump in and you're going to get yourself down all sorts of rabbit holes, perhaps. But I think the tool is very good for confirming I use the term fact patterns. I'm not sure if that's an industry standard or not, but the fact patterns that you think you know. It's good for confirming those, and it's also very good for exposing those so-called unknown unknowns. So it might indicate something that you hadn't even thought of, and I think that's a very useful tool. I think in the past I've used the expression of not just relating to Ask, but all the kind of the machine learned tools, is to cast your net a little wider in the first instance, and then to very quickly narrow that down and surface the information which is more likely to be relevant. And the overall result of that is you've got an accelerated process, because we all know that it's lawyers' time that costs the real money in this game. So it's all about trying to find that likely relevant content more rapidly and also more thoroughly. You may uncover something that the counterparty had no idea about from the same disclosed data set. So that's something which applies not only to Ask, but to the conceptual clustering and the conceptual search within Ask. So yeah, I mean, all brought together, I think that it's a really useful tool. And one of the things that we're going to be looking at next is how we then use the results of Ask, not only just to feed into the conventional grid review, but also to start seeding machine learned models. So you found some useful stuff, but you don't necessarily know you've got it all. So why not, at belt and braces, create yourself a machine learned model out of the results, pass it through conventional review, get it marked up, and then do some illusion testing to see whether that then across the rest of the estate starts to expose even more that might be relevant. So it sounds like you're making yourself more work, but I think actually, again, if you apply these strategies sensibly, you ultimately reduce the timescales. It's just a more intelligent way, working harder, not or faster, not harder, I suppose, or whichever way around it is. You know what I'm trying to say?
I know. It sounds, the way I think of it, and it sounds like you're approaching it the same way, is that Ask and Gen AI more generally is not a replacement technology. It's an additive technology. You can continue to use all the tools you've had available in your tool chest now. You don't throw out all your other tools and say, this is the only one I'm using. It's one more powerful tool.
It shouldn't be thought of as a threat to the investigator or lawyer. It is absolutely a tool that can make their lives easier and probably get some better results. And I think it's it's critical that they adopt these things and try them out. And as I say, we've got many lawyers and many investigators using the tooling now, and sometimes it doesn't yield the results that they want for a whole host of reasons, but it's just one of many tools in the kit bag.
Right.
And where it works, it works extraordinarily well. But you have to be aware of some of the little gotchas around making sure you've constructed your prompt correctly. I mean, one of the things I learned not so long ago was that the prompt that you enter, the tool in the back end actually then runs another semantic search using the keywords and the phraseology that you've got in your prompt to further refine down the set that you're looking at. So, if you miss out a critical component in the language you use in your prompt, you may risk missing critical bits of response. So, I think it's a learning curve for everybody, but definitely from my perspective, it's proving to be useful.
It sounds as well from what you're saying that part of your role as an organization is to help those investigators and attorneys who are going to themselves be working directly with the tool, help them better understand how it works, how they can use it, what searches or questions are likely to be more effective, less effective. It's if I'm hearing correctly, it's not so much that they task you with using Ask, is that more that you educate them on how to make good, effective use of it. Am I understanding correctly?
You're a very perceptive man, George. Yes, the value that we see in Salient Discovery. I mean, there are lots of eDiscovery providers out there, both in terms of products and service providers. But we like to think we differentiate ourselves by bridging the gap between the technologies and the business use. So, be that an investigation or a legal matter, we like to sort of understand the business requirement and then translate those needs into how the technologies can best suit them. So yes, we do an awful lot of heavy lifting in terms of large volumes of data going into the platform, and that's kind of it's a hygiene factor. You've got to do it and you've got to do it well. But we then differentiate ourselves, we try to, by engaging with our clients to make sure that they have understood what this tool set can do for them. And it's a bit like everyone uses Excel, but I'm sure most of us use about 20% of it. There's 80% of functionality in there that could be really, really useful, but no one gets anywhere near. And we want to prevent that being the case with people's use of Reveal. We want them to use everything which is relevant to them to make sure that they're getting the best bang for their buck at the end of the day. But that applies not only with Reveal. We do other things with other technology sets. Not eDiscovery, but the use of Gen AI, for example, as an extraction technology. Now, the world I come from, we also had some extraction technologies, which it was always incredibly difficult to try and extract specific bits of information from unstructured documents. Some bits work well, other bits less well, and then you get into sort of layouts, different layout sort of formats and things like profit and loss accounts. It's just, there's 101 ways of expressing the same information, and these things just trip themselves up. You spend more time trying to construct a reliable model than it would take to actually do the job yourself. We've found that the LLMs in general are much better at that interpretive bit. They can actually interpret what's on the page very well, so you can start asking natural language questions about show me the balance sheet for whatever it was, and with a high degree of reliability it will do that. So that for us is a useful tool, because we can use those kind of aspects of Gen AI to enrich what then goes on in our primary business, which is the discovery. So we have lots of clients with lots of lots of invoices and lots of bank statements and all sorts of things like that, from which, if we can extract that information, which is otherwise relatively dark data or sitting in spreadsheet type sort of formats, and then overlay it with the conversational stuff that goes on around, in the case of fraud, it goes on quite extensively around those transactions, you get that much more holistic view of the world. And ultimately, I keep using the term accelerate, but it's all about accelerating the outcome, which it's a win-win for everybody. So, yeah.
It is still early days. ChatGPT only hit the world, a year and a half ago, if that. Maybe 2 years. I'm losing track, but not very long ago. You were one of the earliest users of Reveal's Ask, and that was less than a year ago.
Yeah.
What are your hopes and aspirations for the future with these capabilities?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things that I'm aware that are on the roadmap. So I think being able to ask subsequent questions or follow-on questions, I think is a logical, obvious enrichments to make. But in more general terms, I think there's other applications for Gen AI, which I'm sure Reveal is aware of and working on. But things like using it to provide justifications for why a document might be privileged. So more rather than looking at a broader corpus and summarizing across a corpus, maybe looking at a more document level to either summarize the document, to provide rationales for why it might be pertinent to a case, or it's privileged, or whatever it might be. So I'm sure those are fairly logical next steps. I'm always amazed at the progress of these technologies, how fast they evolve. And I didn't think we would be having this conversation 6 months ago, but it's gone from nothing to something very significant in a relatively short time. So I honestly don't know what the future holds for these things. It's a little bit scary, but at the same time, the future's bright. I always welcome change. I think change equals opportunity. But I'm glad I'm at the, from my hairstyle, you can tell I'm at the latter end of my career. So I'm not sure I'll be able to keep up too much longer with all these changes, but yeah, no, it's an exciting time, and who knows what's next. I think maybe extraction functionality within Reveal would be a useful thing to stick on the to-do list.
Well, there you go. Well, thank you, David. David Fisk is with Salient. I am George Socha with Reveal, and this has been Reveal's new podcast, Unredacted. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, George. Thank you very much.